I'm suspicious of recording on the computer. All right, so this is the interview for Director of Communications with Richard New, known as the Guardian on the Star Trek CCG message boards. My name is Maggie Geppert. I am the Executive Officer for the Continuing Committee, and I'm conducting this search committee. I want to go around. I live in Illinois, and we are a consent to film state here, so I do need to get, just to be on the right side of the law, I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone's consent to be filmed for this. So Richard, do you consent to be filmed?
I consent.
All right. We have Ross Fertel also on our committee, who is faithful reader on the message boards. Ross, do you consent to be filmed?
I give consent on the condition that any reproductions of this involve Robert De Niro portraying me.
Oh, okay. That's good. Yes, I will. I'll get right on that.
That is my answer.
Yeah. So we all have to decide who's going to play us then. I'm going to vote for Maggie Gyllenhaal then.
Oh,
Nerdo, and I forget your proper first name. I don't know if you want to give your proper first name or not here. Do you consent to be filmed?
Well, yes, I concede. I mean, I consent.
All right. Ryan, do you consent to be recorded since your camera is not on?
Yes.
All right, cool. So let us get started then. So we just put together a series of sort of general questions for this position. So just want to start off, Richard, what do you think the role of a communications director is?
well, I think it's sort of an amalgam of the departments that come under it. One of the big parts is communicating to new and old players alike. So the ambassador program, for instance, is a good way to outreach that and get the message of what the community is offering out that way. And then after that, there's communication within the community, which I see the communication department as sort of a press secretary of sorts. Not necessarily always being the one to come out with the statements, but to marshal the forces together and sort of say, okay, so what's the message that we're going to, what is our answer to these questions, or important questions that the community would like to have answered.
All right, thank you. So I'm just writing down, taking notes. All right. So then next, why do you want to hold this position?
Partly because it's available, and I don't mean that to say, like anything would be acceptable. I don't think there are certain positions I would be good for, but this is something that I think I could definitely do, and it's something that, trying to re-enter the community a little bit, I want to make it clear, I want to help, I want to serve, I want to be a part of making the community the best it can possibly be. And so that's part of the reason that I want to put myself forward, is to say, I might not have been the biggest member of the community recently, but I want to let everybody know that I'm all in. Beyond that, the position itself is something that I've always found interesting. Just the way you express the community outreach type of thing. I've had fairly good luck building up a little community around myself. Not big, but we've brought in some new members, and having new and exciting ways of bringing people into the fold, I think, is the only way that the game continues. It's I know some people have suggested that it's all just about player retention at this point, but I think there's always room for bringing in new people, and I've kind of proved that over the last couple of years just in my little area.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So as a board member, the Director of Communications is subject to the period of review. So that's the vote of no confidence during the period of review. Are you willing to subject yourself to this process?
Absolutely. It's going to be a very public position, being the one to give out information, and not the only one, but one of the people that is most responsible for that. I absolutely should be held accountable by the community.
All right. Tell us why you think the Director of Communications role is so important for the CC.
I can get into an answer talking about just things that have happened recently, but I think I'd like to sort of talk about it more in general, which is, historically, and we've heard this complaint from the community many, many times, that the committee itself has not been fantastic about getting information out there, about letting people know what's happening, what the thought process is, partially due to, I think, reaction to how information has gotten out before. I don't know. I try not to be too specific about anything, and I apologize about that. The importance of the position is being a voice for the official policies, the official release of new sets, new material, getting all that out there and in a positive, insightful, fully descriptive way is something that, and quickly, by the way, is something that the community has been asking for, and it's something that should definitely be considered a priority. So that would be why the position is important.
All right. So how do you think the CC is doing in retaining players, promoting the game, and dealing with problem players?
I think we've taken, to answer the last part first, I think we've taken a huge step forward. I think that studies have shown that, communities throughout the world online communities have shown over and over again that you cannot have a viable, enthusiastic community and retain good, productive members when you have members that try and disrupt. I've been public about my opinions about certain things, and without having to, without having the ability to remove problems, the community ends up getting bogged down by those problems. And that's not to say that just removing the problems and pretending they don't exist means that they don't exist. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But it opens the door for new members coming in. It opens the door for retaining members. I was here several years ago on a regular basis, and on a fairly regular basis, you would get a open letter to the community saying, "Bye, and here's why." I'm very glad that I think that we've addressed that, and I think addressing that brings us closer to addressing the first two things of new players and player retention. There's obviously, it's not a cure-all. It's not a one solution will do everything, but it's a good first step. So more work going into bringing new players in at this point is, I think, a benefit. For instance, part of my application was saying that years ago, I was involved in a small committee that was trying to make a how to play video. And we wrote the scripts up for it. We wrote how it was going to happen. Since then, I've actually gotten some experience in producing things like that. Not, expert level, but I've gotten some experience doing that. And it's something that I think is long overdue for the community to be able to say, like our next, the Picard promo that says, hey, here's the address of the continuing committee. We should have another one with a QR code that, like any game nowadays that has a to-play video, a lot of times in the rules, they'll have a QR code. You can just scan it with your phone and boom, now you're watching how to play and you don't have to read that rule booklet. And so I think that's something that our game should be headed towards, is that's a fantastic another first step in that arena of bringing in new players, is let's really lower the overwhelming difficulty in coming into a game this complex and this late in its development. Hope that answers that question.
Okay.
Excellent points.
I like that. I like that idea of the QR code on the next business card promos. And we have precedent for that over in first edition. I know you're not a big one guy, Richard, but you probably have seen Quantum Incursions.
Yes.
Although banned now, probably for good reason. But at least we've done that before, so we know that that's a thing that's doable in terms of cards.
And I'd like to mention, I've taken a couple years away from the community, like I mentioned. During that time, it wasn't just me having kids and not doing anything. I've been playing Star Trek the entire time. I have checked in sporadically. And the other thing that I've been doing over that time is I've been getting highly into games in general. One of the old One-E designers, Jeremy Commander, has a game night in the area, and I've been going to that ever since I've been in California. So for the past, 2012, I've been going there for the past 8 years. Obviously not in the last couple months, but and he's very much into game design. One of the things that he does every month is a prototype night. So he brings in designers from the area and they get to test out their new games. So you really get to see the nuts and bolts of what makes a game work, what makes a game not work, how does the feedback from players affect the game from week to week. You get to see these games develop over time, and it's become a very fascinating subject for me. So much so that Jeremy Commander, another designer in the area, Brian Hink, and I had a podcast called the Board Game Business Podcast. If you'd like to hear some of my credentials, you can listen to the podcast. They're still going with new episodes. I dropped out a few years ago just because it was maybe a year. I don't remember exactly how long ago, because it was getting a little bit difficult with the kids. But I came into it as the novice, and I felt like I learned so incredibly much from these two guys that knew their craft. And the podcast is not necessarily about how do you design a game. It's about the business around how you design a game. How do you promote it? How do you get artists involved? What's the pay structure like? We have all sorts of topics that would be very interesting to someone who wants to design a game and goes like, I can do the game part, but I want to know all the other parts involved in that. So that was sort of our focus. It was fascinating to hear them talk for years. Hopefully I didn't make too much of a fool of myself asking dumb questions, but that was kind of my role.
Hey, let me touch on that, Maggie, for a second, because I know I had a conversation with you. Richard, what would you feel like doing a Star Trek CCG podcast? Inviting some folks in, because I know when I got started got back in the game in 2012, one of the things that I looked forward to the most was the Section 31 podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that keeps interest of folks. What would your view on potentially starting something up like that, either with yourself or maybe some of your team members?
I think that's another great idea. I'm with you. I think that I used to I've listened to every episode of Section 31. I was a big fan. Before that, I remember I've been on a couple episodes of Charlie's podcast. I can't remember what he called it. but we at different times talked about the design for certain sets. That might have been section 31 too. I don't remember exactly, but there
No,
was,
I remember him doing it. It wasn't section 31. It was like, I don't
Wasn't
know,
it
it was
chairman?
like it was something like view from the top, or the chair from the chairman's desk, or something like that.
something like, yeah. So every time I had participated in helping design a 2-week set, there we would usually do a podcast about that and talk about some of the stories along the way, the intentions that we're doing. I think that's always, that might be a very interesting thing, being that we have a fairly regular production schedule. Again, I know it's not necessarily 100%, ironclad all the time. Things get pushed, but I think regularly we could have interviews with people involved in the production, and not necessarily just the designers. We could talk to playtesters, find out what that job is like. I mean, that might be an interesting way of bringing in new people to that location, is saying, hey, look, if you've ever thought about this, let's talk to someone and find out, okay, what is the day-to-day of going through a set, and week to week, how do you manage it? Does it take a bunch of money? Do you have to keep printing out new pages? How do you go about trying things out with different iterations without it being too much of a time suck, that type of thing? It will be an interesting conversation to have, because I mean, I know some of the answers to those questions, and I'm pretty sure I've learned a thing or two, but I don't know if it's necessarily what a lot of the community thinks it is. They probably think you have to sit down, have to build an entire deck. You have, like an entirely new deck that, has never been built before. Then you have to play an entire game with someone, and that's not necessarily the correct answer there. But you can. But, it will be interesting to have that discussion with a 1E playtester, a 2E playtester. I love to find out if 1E playtesting, how that stacks up to 2E playtesting, which I think I understand fairly well.
And I added a question in there this morning on COVID-19. And if you follow any of the Star Trek CCG groups on Facebook, you'll see there's been a huge resurgence of folks that have become interested in the game again. And I even thought and just ran out of time. You know how it is. You have kids too. But I would love to talk to some of the older folks. I don't know if you know Jim Colson. He used to be hugely involved with Decipher and stuff. Even talking to them and hearing their old stories, that would be something that would be interesting to me. Or just interviewing a player about, DecipherCon back in the day. I think that would be fun and entertaining, and anything that I think that we can get to reinvigorate players to, talk about the game or anything like that may bring them or retain them to the game. And I think
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that when I see the role of director of communications, that's what I think about, is that relationship with people, because it's not just communications, but it's PR too. So
have Lucas do one of his Road to Worlds interviews and put it on the podcast.
I would love that. I mean, I would be there. I'd be there all day long listening to old stuff like that, just to reminisce. But that's just an opinion that I have there. So.
Oh yeah, I'm with you. I love movies too, so I listen to a lot of movie podcasts. I just listened to one about Jaws. So it's not like the new thing has to be what you talk about. It can be something from years ago, and you learn new stories that you never knew before. You're absolutely right.
All right. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Ryan, for those very insightful questions just now. I am working, Ryan wrote a ton of questions this morning, for which I am eternally grateful, because as a scientist, writing things down on paper makes me, not really, but that's the stereotype. Anyway, all right, so do you think that the current way of communicating with players is working? If so, how? If not, what would you improve?
There's a yes and a no to that question. Yes, generally, I think that in my interaction with people, and I get the feeling that I've always felt that I can read people pretty well. I get the feeling that the as we call them, the green badges, are straightforward. They tell you what they're thinking, if they possibly can tell you about it. One of the things that I think upsets players is the not being able to tell people about it type of thing. And that's something that there's two solutions to that problem. One is we just need to speed up the rate at which we can get through our decision-making process and get out information. And that should be done. I think having the time for the writing team or the communication director to come out and write up an official statement and say, okay, and get it out and say, okay, everybody agree, great, post, would be beneficial to certain situations. Not taking a week before announcing something that, for a lot of people, they know what's going on already and they're just waiting for the announcement to come out. And the other is, I don't know how to say this. I mean it to be respectful, is to train the community, to teach the community maybe, that sometimes not knowing something is okay. To say, and maybe even that's part of the speed aspect, is we have a statement to make about this, give us a minute to put it all together, as opposed to saying nothing. But letting the community know that it is okay to sit there and not know exactly what every aspect of everything going on is. I don't want to talk about things that happen behind the scenes because I think that's inappropriate, kind of to my point. But I was having a conversation with someone about the model for playtesting, and the concept came up of, well, I prefer things to be transparent, and I've heard that term a lot. I want transparency, and I understand that, and I think there should be, in the end, full transparency. But I think the community being comfortable with the idea that if you wait long enough, all the information will come out is a perfectly acceptable position to have. For instance, in playtesting, you don't need to know, in my opinion, you don't necessarily need to know what all the designers are thinking all the time. You don't necessarily need to know what all the playtesters have said about, in their playtests to do your job correctly. You need to know, you need to be given the information that is important for you, and then the explanations and accept the explanations. Give people the benefit of the doubt. I've said that before. And then when you've done that, at the end of the process, then we can break down the walls and we can say, okay, here's what was happening over here. These are the decisions that we made over here. This is what your comment specifically led to. If we want to have those discussions afterwards, we can have those discussions after the scientific process has gone to fruition. And as a whole in the community, I think that is sort of a mindset that I think we have to embrace just a little bit more. The idea that you might not know all the information right now. That's okay. At the end, once everything has been released, we can talk about all the behind the scenes stuff that you'd like, without giving away specifically who said what and that type of thing. But we can talk about things after the veil of secrecy has fallen down. It's probably not the best phrase to use, but that's kind of my feeling, is that the yes and no is the committee could probably do a better job at being a little faster and a little bit more direct with people of what's coming up or what we haven't shared yet. The community could also get better at accepting that we need to be patient and get the information as it's appropriate. I hope that answers that question.
That does. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, go for it, Nerdo.
To transparency, I think full transparency would be kind of fatal, what do you think about some kind of middle roads where you say, for example, just at the moment we are working on a new HQ for, no idea, Voyager, for example. There was an incident with that on Facebook. Or because the whole thing is about patience, right? Could also say we're just working on making cards with species 8472 a little more more effective in the games. So just to feed the people a little bit on information what's going on behind the curtains, but not telling exactly what's going on. So they have a little bit of information, but not everything.
That's basically for instance, in the set that I have just, we're working on the post-production aspects of it right now. There were things that we put in there that did not make it to the final set. And some people would say, well, we told you all along this wasn't going to work. And that's fine. Or, how do I put it? One of my favorite shows of all time is The West Wing. In one episode, they're talking about a missile shield that they have that, the whole idea is someone's shooting a missile at us, we can shoot a missile at it and knock it out of the sky. It doesn't work. And they talk about it many times in the episode, this doesn't work. And finally, they get to the part of the episode where the character that's been pushing for it the entire time gets to have his big moment, and he says, and someone asks him, why do you still want to work on this project if it doesn't work? He goes, because with the understanding that in the history of everything that's worked, there was a time that it didn't. And that's what I feel about, sometimes it sort of goes along with the whole idea of give people the benefit of the doubt. I told you this card was broken and it's still here. Okay, but the set hasn't come out yet. So it's not like the end of the world has happened yet. Let me see if I can keep trying to fix it. Let me see if I can make this idea work. And if I can't, at the end, it gets cut, which is exactly what happened. So that's kind of, I don't have to share the information of all the things that are going on in my head as a designer with all of my playtesters. I'm sorry, I can only sort of focus on it from that point of view. I apologize. But I can't tell them the moment that's the thing about giving away information. The moment I tell them I'm thinking about cutting this, then I don't have to playtest it anymore. Then it's going to be gone. There is, bias that is introduced by letting information like that go. So I absolutely agree with Nerdo that even after the whole thing's done, I don't think, a lot of people are going to necessarily want to know all the pieces of information. You kind of, okay, the process is done. It seemed to work out pretty well. That's fine. I think most of the time people are just going to let that lay. If they want to have private conversations saying, okay, well then what's your answer to this thing? And when I said this, what happened? I'll be happy to answer those questions. If it affects the community, we can do it in public. I think private would be acceptable in that case. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't think, I'm not saying that at the end of the process, we post all of the messages that happened throughout the entire process. That's not what I'm saying by, complete transparency.
Oh God, that's madness.
Yeah, that would be
madness.
crazy, obviously.
Yeah,
I'm saying that once the process is over and once the walls between us that need to be there in order for the process to work are brought down, then we can have that conversation of, the between the two of us without the middleman passing information back and forth. We can have that conversation between us. That's kind of what I'm talking about is, we need to be patient, be like Maggie, take your notes, write down your questions. And then at the end, if you still have those questions, we can have that conversation. More than likely, again, private if we can, but public if we need to.
Cool. That brings me up to a follow-up question, if everybody is okay with that.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I have run a lot of clubs, of hobby clubs and so on, and we had a lot of projects here and there, especially in the tabletop sections, where we made things like campaigns, where we made house rules, and we invited the whole crowd, the whole people playing the game to give us their inputs and their ideas. And there were always people who came with ideas which were interesting, but we could not put those ideas into this existing rules frame. And after a certain time, the peoples which get their ideas rejected constantly, they get a little bit of grumpy, right?
Mhm.
So we have solved that problem, of course, but I would like to hear from you how you would like to solve that problem with a player who wants to support you, but his ideas get always rejected. And he feels very bad for that.
Right. Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure how I would deal with that situation. I'd be very curious to find out what solution you found.
Yeah.
In general, I find that fully explaining, I've gotten accused many times of, I'm not going to read that. That's a book. It's like, okay, well then you're in the wrong profession, because we have to explain ourselves. We have to put out our rationale for something. Again, I'm have to look at it from the designer perspective. But when I get feedback for a card, and I get the exact same thing. I get people saying, you should do this, and then we don't do that. And I think certainly my instinct was to allow the cards to speak for themselves. And one of the things that I've learned over the most recent process is, I think one of the better things to do would be to explain, we got feedback on this. We chose not to go that way because of this particular interaction, or because we don't want the game to head in that direction, or because frankly it's just unpopular. I think explaining why something doesn't work is less damaging to someone, and there's always a way to do it with tact and with caring about not making the person feel foolish for having suggested it in the first place. That's the whole idea behind the phrase, there's no bad ideas. It's, we might not go with them, but thinking about other possibilities is not harmful. And so that would be that's where I see the solution being fully explanative about this is the thought process for it. This is why we didn't go in this direction. This is why we went in the other direction. We think this will work better. And hopefully the person understands that they were listened to, and they don't get upset about, they don't listen to me. Well, you were listened to. I'm explaining why the idea that you had was not the one that we went with, which by definition would mean that I had to have listened to your idea. And that's kind of where I come down now. I would love to have done the last couple months a different way. I think going forward, that would be my instinct would be, let me spell out every little thing. That's a bad way to put it. Not every little thing, but the basics of what the thought process is.
You should often go with your instinct, because it was more or less the thing how we solve the problem. I went with a few of those guys who had their ideas, and I sat down with them by a coffee or a Coke or whatever. Well, I mean a Coca-Cola, not cocaine or something. All right. So
we assumed Coca-Cola.
Yes, thank you.
This is in Texas, where we say,
well, it's
Coke,
not my
what do you mean?
so there you go. Yeah, and so I took other ideas which we actually implemented in the campaigns, and then I showed those people one by one, of course, how the ideas actually started, and that those ideas were over the top, like his idea, and that we always have to make some cuts. And then, like you said, there comes this cracking point when you can see in the other person if he or she is actually listening and understanding what you're saying. Mm-hmm. If yes, then you can work with that person. And in the end, you have transformed that person from a guy who gives you ideas to a person who knows how you're actually working, how the whole thing is working, and how he or she can contribute. Because through this conversation, they know how the process works. And then you got somebody who can support you and knows even more than they knew previously and can act accordingly and give you better ideas with a better understanding how things are developing within the campaign. So you were on a very good road there.
Well, thank you for that excellent question.
Always welcome.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about some of the projects and initiatives we have in mind. You have in mind. We talked about the finishing up those Learn to Play videos and doing some podcasting. Did you have any other projects like that you had sitting in your brain, Richard?
One of the things I mentioned in the application was we've been talking about this for years. I understand the magnitude of it, but revamping the site, making it a little bit more, we all know how it works now, but I think there's still times that I'll be looking for something and I'll have to go, okay, where is that again? You know, and I've been there for years. So
it's a project that's going on in the background right now. So,
yeah, I'm sure. It's been talked about for years. I'm sure people are continually working on it. But I think as part of the Director of Communications, that would probably fall under that office's purview, I would think. You know, it's outreach to the community. It's how we present ourselves. So I think that would be that would make sense. And of course, working in conjunction with other departments that, you know, make sure that their voices and their important information is heard. But just having things be a little bit more easily accessible at, you know, maybe not just at a glance. We're not expecting people to just be like, I got it, you know, I get the whole site. But, you know, having a simple walkthrough of the site, even just having at the top, you know, hey, new players, you know, let me walk you through this, you know. Maybe another video. Let's take you through the site and show you how everything works, you know. But something along those lines was another thought in my head. Other than that, nothing comes to mind. I'm sure that I've had other thoughts about things we could do, but you know, sometimes I'm not like Maggie. Sometimes I don't take my notes all the time. I have to be reminded of, oh, right, I had that idea, didn't I?
Sorry, Maggie. I wanted to second what he was saying on that, is that I think the Director of Communication absolutely needs to be involved in the revamp of the website and be firsthand player and all that, to make sure that, you know, it is that, again, that PR perspective of the job, that it appears to the new players, it appears to the old players, what's the feedback, and it's kind of a constant revision and taking all that feedback in. So I really loved your response on that.
Thank you.
All right, so the next thing I have here, although I'm learning to love this word. I've never loved the word utilized before. I always find it, use always seems to be just as good to me. But I think I'm starting to come around to its use in the English language. How would you utilize each member of your communications team? And that's the writing team manager, the social media manager, the proofreading team leader, and the chief ambassador.
First of all, I remember years ago when utilize became a power in Tribbles, and someone made that exact same comment. Like, is there a time when utilize doesn't just mean use?
That was probably me.
Yeah.
That was probably me.
I don't remember specifically who, so yeah. How would I specifically use them? I think working with the writing team, you work closely with the first edition, Tribbles, and second edition chairman, which are committee members, the directors, to make sure that each their primary responsibility is making sure that each set is promoted, and so you want to make sure that you're making yourself available for that and getting. That's my favorite part of the release process is, you know, as a player and as a designer, is just seeing the information come out, the excitement from day to day of things getting hyped and pumped up, and then in the downtime, creating projects. I know we have a couple already, but having projects that go on that give people that new information. Ryan was talking earlier about the podcast and having the new information out there, and you know, consuming that, and that's just another place that people can get that new information. So just having, I would think that there should be an article for, at the very least, first and second edition every week. And I know I don't, okay. I feel like sometimes we do a good job at that. Sometimes we don't necessarily do a good job. And I know there's different projects going on, but just having, you know, let's keep pitching ideas. Let's keep putting things out there and, you know, driving interest in the site. Let's have people spend time, you know, the more time the more information you give them, the more time they're going to spend thinking about Star Trek, the more time that they're going to invest in, you know, oh, I never thought about that card that way. Oh, I kind of want to build that deck now, you know, and then you just something simple like that can add to the excitement of playing the game. Let's see. Next up, the social media. That I know is very useful for, again, set releases, having another place to, you know, throw some spoilers out or throw some extra information out. I've actually found that the Twitter account does a pretty good job. I follow them, and there's, you know, every once in a while you'll see someone have a post on a completely different game, or, you know, just following some Star Trek handle, and someone says something about a character, and someone says, you know, and we jump in there and go, hey, if you want to play that character, they're playable in Star Trek, you know, CCG. So come on down to this site, that type of thing. That's a great use of that. I don't necessarily think that needs to be like everyday type of thing. That tends to get a little bit spammy, but I think they do a pretty good job of that. Maggie, help me out. What? Oh, ambassadors. This is, I feel, I am an ambassador, and I feel this is one of my weaknesses. I feel like I have done, or I have, I found that the information, the resources available have been pretty adequate for me. Getting beginner decks and printing them out and doing a playthrough with players. Again, this is where the how to play videos might be helpful. Although for a new player, I'm not necessarily sure, you know, hey, you want to learn how to play the game? Watch this video and then come see me. You know, like that's not necessarily the best way to do it. If you can, those beginner decks, I haven't tried out the new ones. I have a Jeremy Commander actually introduced me to another guy right before the outbreak that said, you know, he wanted to learn how to play. So I'm ready to print out a new deck and try those out for the first time, which will be fun. And then teach another person how to play the game and hopefully get another player in my player group. But this is something where I would want to work with. I don't think I've ever met Robin, our new chief ambassador, and so I'd be very interested to see what our ambassadors have to say about, you know, things that they need. I felt well served, so I'd be very interested to find out how I can help in that arena a little bit more. And I'm sorry, Maggie, I'm blanking on the last group.
The last one is the proofreading team.
Proofreading.
And their job right now has been limited to proofreading sets.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you say that. I don't know if there's, because I read a lot of the articles, not necessarily all of them, but I read a lot of the articles, and there's very often that I find a typo in them. So it might not be a bad idea to have the proofreaders, if they can, look through the articles before they come out. But I've actually been very, very impressed on the TUI side with the proofreading department. Again, we're going through the post-production on the set that I was working on. So just having people go through and find little wording changes. I'm like, oh, of course it should say that. You know, like there's so much complexity to the language that we use on our cards. Having those people is invaluable. I know that I usually try and do a proofreading pass on every set that I am around for, and usually find something. So something to hopefully help, but not necessarily always. Always good to have another pair of eyes anyway. That's a department that I don't know how they do necessarily on the 1E side. I assume as well, but I think that generally they do a very good job at what they're doing, and maybe expanding to, if it's not too much trouble for them to just look over articles before they go up, wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea either. Maybe a rotating schedule for the team. Just you read over the articles this week and make sure that they're all good. You know, that type of thing.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so we've kind of
Can I ask
covered...
something? Maybe relevant, maybe not. Do we have a department for real life laws? Like we are a nonprofit corporation under the laws of Washington. So do we have some kind of law departments?
Like a legal department, yeah.
Yeah, legal department. And would it be under which department would that fall? Would it be the communication thing?
No, we don't have a legal department. I would assume they would go under operations, or
Okay.
or they would be the first subcommittee for the chief financial officer.
Okay, so sorry for that question out of order, but
No, that's fine.
It's
okay. An interesting question. No, we don't have a legal team. I actually don't know if we have any, like, in our membership. Somebody was asking me this the other day, that if we have any attorneys in the...
attorneys, that's the name. Okay.
Richter? No, wait, that's judge, not lawyer. No, we don't have any attorneys in in our membership that I know of. At least nobody's like, hey, yes, we got a lot of different professions, but you know, scientists, engineers, but also anything from, you know, I'm a manager at Walmart, so yeah, all sorts of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Right.
I'm gonna start wrapping up. So some of these questions we've touched on already. So we've touched on all the different team members. We touched on the nostalgia question. We've talked a little bit about streaming video. Quick question, have you ever dealt with news media? Have you promoted anything on television or in print?
No, I don't think professional media. We promoted our podcast on Twitter, Facebook, that type of thing, but not in like a traditional media sense. I don't think that I have. I'm not entirely sure that's necessarily the best course of action for our community, is, you know, to bring in media attention, but
yeah, I could just imagine if we started doing commercials on like
right.
primetime NBC, and all of a sudden CBS is like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's probably a bad idea.
Super Bowl commercial. Sorry, I had a cough there.
Oh yes, we should do infomercials. That would be hilarious. We could do a podcast of infomercials, Ross.
No, cough Super Bowl commercial. Cough.
Oh no, I don't have that cash. Do you have that cash?
How many banks do you want me to rob? I mean, no.
Okay, so I wrote that question, and I'm getting laughed at right now, which is kind of funny.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. We shouldn't be
No.
laughing about that.
No, it's fine. The purpose behind that, and I guess it was a poorly worded question, was basically, have you ever been the spokesperson of something to someone else, like in a media fashion? So if I rewrote the question, I would write it that way.
Okay.
Oh,
In our podcast.
Okay, that makes more sense.
In our podcast, I was the host of the podcast. So I was the person that, signed on and signed off every week when we did our regular podcast. Anytime we had, people mentioning us on Twitter, I would try and make sure that I favored, retweeted, that type of thing. But as far as you're speaking, as far as like being a spokesperson type of thing, no, not really. Like officially.
That question makes so much more sense now, Ryan. Thank you.
Sorry,
for
I did poorly. Yeah, and like the copyright stuff is always what we have to worry about. Of course, with dealing with any kind of news or anything like that. But I think that being able to talk about the organization as a whole, like you were talking to a reporter, would be what your job would be focused on when dealing with people that aren't in the community. So that's why I worded it that way.
I'm fascinated a lot of times about, like for instance, in the last couple of years, I'm interested in film, and I participated in a couple of 48-hour film festivals. So the idea is you get an assignment on a Friday night, and in 2 days on a Sunday night, you turn in a 7-minute movie, which is absolutely a sprint in the concept of making a movie. So it's interesting to me, when I've never really been the in front of the camera guy. So when I, talk to my actors and they'll do something and it's like, the camera's right here, right? Like they can't see if you turned away, like that type of thing. And it's interesting to me how many people seemed unaware of the overall picture, the overall, a really good actor is able to, know where the camera is, know what they must look like from that angle, know what, where they can move, what is the field of vision for the camera, that type of thing. So they don't go off, they don't, that type of thing. They're interested in that type of thing. And I feel like that's also the case for a really good writer, a really good public spokesperson, is being aware of your surroundings, being aware that the people that are going to read this could include this group of people. So I have to keep that in mind. The people that could eventually see this will not include anyone in this group. So it's okay, like we can lower our level of strictness of how we're keeping our comments, where we're focusing our attention. I feel like that's something that I do have, that I am aware of. I'll be the first to admit, I don't want to, again, no details, but on the design boards, sometimes I'm a little bit more crass with my wording just because I know, okay, only this number of people can possibly read this. Nothing offensive or anything like that, but just sort of like, okay, what do we, whereas when I go out and talk to other people outside of the design, then I'll talk about, there were a couple times that things happened in the last set that when I got back to the design side, again, I don't want to give away specifics, but someone on there would say, that was incredibly diplomatic. I don't think I could have done that. And so I feel like that is something that I do have, the ability to recognize, what is, remembering anyway, what is the group that has access to this material, and making sure that it holds the the can't think of a good word for it. The strictness that is necessary for lowest common denominator is a bad term, but that type of thing. It's like whatever is the most restrictive concept there. That's the one that I'm going to try and write towards, and being aware of that. Yeah. So kind of yes would be the answer to your question, but I know what you're talking about at the very least.
Well, that's actually a good start, to be honest. I mean, I have a YouTube channel with about 1,400 subscribers, only for tabletop, with my very unprofessional videos I do there, but people are still enjoying it, right?
Whenever I tweet something on Twitter, I want to make sure, like, I have opinions about stuff that that come up, and I don't post about it because, you know, I think down the road, I want to make sure that someone looking through my Twitter feed doesn't see something that, you know, they find objectionable or that I would end up getting in trouble over, you know. So that has stopped me before, even though it's probably not an issue at the time. It's something that I do think about. It's, you know, it's out there, it's available.
That's why I use zero social media as a teacher. I use no social media at all, because that's just, even though I have tenure now and, you know, I still don't feel comfortable putting anything out there on social media. So I understand that level of caution. All right. Well, I think that I want to just wrap this up then, and I'm going to wrap it up with my favorite question that Ross always asks. So that was like one of the first things I put in there, Ross. What is your favorite unpopular Star Trek episode and why?
The first one that came to mind was Penpals. I don't necessarily think that is necessarily unpopular, but it's not one that I hear a lot of people talk about as being like, you know, oh, I love that episode. I think it's very good. I think it's one of the first episodes of Star Trek in which you get the entire cast in one room and you get to see all their individual personalities come out throughout the course of the conversation. And you get to see Picard at his very Picardish, which is sitting back and listening to every opinion that comes across. And, you know, Worf being the rules are this, we do that, you know, all the way to Pulaski, who's like, I don't care what the rules are, we're going to do whatever is right, you know, like that's, you get to see the entire spectrum of everybody having just a simple conversation of, here's a moral dilemma, let's talk about it. And I cannot think of another episode where they do that. So that's the first one that comes to mind. You know, off of the top of my head, I can't necessarily think of a bad one that I think it's a bad shrift all the time. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. For your reference, mine is Manhunt.
Okay.
Because I actually adore Loxana Troy.
Okay.
And I find that episode to be incredibly goofy and,
yeah.
But also, you know, not the weird hormonal issues, which are, you know, slightly offensive, but just the Loxana. I love that's Loxana at her most. I'm me, and I don't give an F what you think. Like, so that's mine. All right. So did any of the other committee members? Oh, I think I had one specific. Oh, there was one more specific question for you. I almost forgot this one. This is a good one. What does the ideal communications look like for your upcoming set?
I'm right now thinking about a couple articles that I'd like to write. I think I'll probably end up only doing one, but there is one specific card that, without an explanation, I don't think people will get. And that's really what I think the article that I want to write. I want to write about one specific card and have people walk away from that who might look at the card and go, what? Walk away going, no, that's perfect. That's exactly what it should be. Because to me, it is perfect. and I feel like that I think would be my ideal communication, is being able to change someone's mind about something, to that open their eyes to something that they might not have thought of before. One of the best articles that I can think of was the one with right after I can't remember what it was called, but Call to Arms, or no, was it Call to Arms? No, Captain's Log came out. So was it in Captain's Log? I don't think so.
Captain Log was set number 10, as far as I know.
Yes, but like the card itself, Captain's Log, where it was the captain could be removed from random selections, and there was a set, or there was a an article that came out that had it listed like 8 personnel, and they said, what do all these personnel have in common? And like there was Tosk on the list, and there was a bunch of Defiant commanders, and there was like Chavarnik on the list, and it was like, well, you can start seeing it in some of the outliers' abilities, the ability to hide from a random selection. But then they introduced that card. They go, now imagine putting all of them in one ship, and they all are safe from random selection. And that got my imagination working very well. I just, that one worked on me. I liked that concept. I've always wanted to, ever since we did the Ferengi Cisco, I always wanted to try to do a rainbow a DS9 deck that did the exact same thing with the commanders, because that might be fun and interesting, but mix the 2 different types of decks. But yeah, that always sort of, that type of thing where you get to think about something in a way that you haven't thought about before. I like those type of articles. Get your brain working.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And does anyone on the committee have any other questions they want to ask Richard?
Maybe one potentially hurtful one.
Okay.
Okay.
The CC and the dojo, your opinion?
I was recently invited to the dojo. I haven't been there yet. I've kind of been with the COVID-19 outbreak. I've had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old at home. Usually when I put the 2-year-old down for a nap, I can tell the 5-year-old, give daddy, half hour to check the site. And that's a lot of the time what I do my business through, is that, or when I get an email that there's a new post on something I'm following, that, okay, really quick, I'm going to go in there and throw down a response. I have not had time to explore it. So before giving an opinion on that, I would prefer being able to do that, and I just haven't had the time yet. So I can't answer that question. I don't know.
So you need more information. The perfect answer.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. I'm very happy with this one. So I don't have any further questions, so we can skip me then.
Anybody else? No, Ross says no. Ryan's off. All right.
I'm good. I'm right here. I'm
Okay.
good. Thank you.
All right. Well, then I will go ahead and stop recording.